Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're looking at the P-51D-5 Mustang, an all-American hero in World War II. Basically because one of my subscribers has a birthday coming up and asked me to review it. Guardian of Eagles, this one is for you. Now, the Mustang, the first one in its tree. As you can see, here it is, the P-51. You also have the other one, the D-30, but you unlock this one first. And at a BR of 4.7 in arcade and 5.0 in realistic, it is definitely safe to say this thing is a beast. Now, looking in arcade with a BR of 4.7, you can actually get a really good lineup of Americans. Like, you can throw in some B-17s at 5.0, obviously King Cobras as well, very good, and the F4U-1C Corsair. And if you're going up to the BR of 5.0, you might as well throw in a Bearcat as well if you have that unlocked. You can also throw in a PBJ and even a B-17G if you're feeling a bit adventurous. But what does it come up against? Well, it basically comes up against the higher tier BF-109s, the Focke-Wulfs, everything like that, as you can see over here. The Russians, it basically comes up with the higher tier prop planes once again. It basically just comes up against the higher tier prop planes. But luckily, because of its BR, it does not come up against the early jets, which is absolutely wonderful. It's in that great pocket of tier 4 where it doesn't face jets, but it only faces the higher tier prop planes, which is lovely. Looking at its upgrades, as you can see, I haven't fully done it yet, but I have got all the performance ones. The cover doesn't really make much of a difference, and neither does the G-suit. For this stuff, I'm never going to use it anyway, so what's the point? Don't have the new MGs, but so what? This thing is still a beast. So, it has 6 50 caliber machine guns, 3 on each wing, so you do have to worry a bit about convergence, but you do have a lot more advantages instead of just that. Its rate of climb, its turn time is wonderful, its max speed is amazing, everything is beautiful on this plane. But as we go through this review, we'll get more into it. So anyway, let's get on to some arcade battles. So here we are in some arcade battles. I have 2 of them here for you today, and they're both domination. I did try and get a ground strike and a domination, but I had about 20 consecutive matches of domination, so I kind of got sick of trying. So I said, screw it, let's just have 2 dominations. Basically, in arcade, the Mustang P-51D-5 handles beautifully. With all of its upgrades, or at least most of them, it handles like a dream. It is great at turning, it is great at climbing, and it has a brilliant rate of fire from those 650 cals. It basically has everything you want in arcade, and it also puts to shame the idea that you need cannons in arcade to do well. These 650s absolutely destroy anything. Now, the Mustang in this game is a great energy fighter, but also it has that hidden tract of being a great turn fighter as well. Usually, the aircraft that you come up against around this BR are very good at high to mid altitudes and are very good energy fighters, but not so good turn fighters unless you're looking at Spitfires or Zeros. And the Mustang, it has both of the ways you can fly, really. I mean, there are other ways, but the main 2 are either to energy fight, to boom and zoom, and to turn fight. This thing can do both. With its combat flaps out, even without them, turn fighting is a great option, and you don't have that kangaroo problem you do in realistic, where at low speeds, if you try and turn it, wiggles about a bit. This thing flies like an absolute dream. Against any aircraft, I feel like I have the edge. I feel like if I can't kill them, or if they can outturn me, I can just run away. Like, this straight line speed of the Mustang is absolutely wonderful, even at base level. And that can really come in handy when you get yourself into a situation where you need to get away. There aren't many fighters which can catch you around this BR, which is absolutely wonderful, and also you can just tear people asunder with those guns. There is never a situation where I feel like, oh, I've been outfoxed, or oh, I can't get out, kind of like where you just have to accept that your plane's getting shot down. In the Mustang, there's always something you can do against the enemy to at least try and postpone them or something like that. When flying a thunderbolt, for example, like when one of my wings gets blackened, I feel like I can't do anything. Like I'm done. Just kill me, just finish me off. I'll hold J, you'll get the kill. In the Mustang, even when I take some damage, or even when the enemy has an upper hand for a little bit, I feel like I still can do something. I'm still there. This thing, when it's heavily damaged, it's kind of like with the MiG-335, where even if it has taken some hits, even if part of your plane is black, it can still do really well. It can still handle okay, and it can still, contribute to the battle. The main problem with this thing is its engine, damage model-wise. The engine is, well, it really struggles in arcade. In realistic, not so much, but in arcade, definitely. So head-to-heads, maybe not a great idea in arcade. Ammunition-wise, I think tracers is a great idea. Armor-piercing and high explosive at the same time. I mean, it's the perfect combo. It's as simple as that, and they're all like that. AP, IT rounds, so armor-piercing, incendiary tracer bullets, so you know where your shots are going. There are armor-piercing, and also they set the target on fire with that high explosive. It's just absolutely wonderful. Now, looking at the planes you come up against in arcade, with the Germans, you're looking at the higher tier Focke-Wulfs and the Bf-109, so how do you deal with them? Well, you can outturn them, so there you go. You look at the British, they have the Spitfires, boom and zoom them, energy fight them, simple as that. You look at the Japanese, you look at the Ki-84, you even look at the N1K, stuff like that. You can easily beat them because you have the straight line speed. If they get into a position where they are, well, they're basically in an advantageous position over you, what can you do? You just run away. I know it doesn't sound very patriotic and very American, but sometimes that's what you gotta do. You gotta get out of there and fight another day. There's one thing, one of the notes that Gaijin has in the loading screen, which I think is very is very good. It basically says something like, your plane can die, but your pilot must survive, so get home, you can fight another day. Which is kind of what I feel with this Mustang. There's a lot of planes where I feel like if I get into a terrible position, I'm done. Like, it's as simple as that. But in the Mustang, you can do something, you can run away. The main problem, I'd suppose, in arcade is that the roll rate isn't great, so dodging shots isn't always a great plan to do. Most of the time, it's just try and get enough distance between you and the enemy to run away. But that's very subjective. I mean, some people may say it's great. For me personally, I don't think it is. Looking at its BR, around 5, I believe it's 5.0, I'll just check right now. 4.7 in arcade? Holy moly, 4.7? Well, that's absolutely beautiful, because 4.7 basically means unless you're in that top 5% that Gaijin claim, you won't face jets, basically. So you don't have to worry about jets in arcade, which is absolutely wonderful when you think about it. It's one of those top tier fighters which doesn't have to deal with jets, kind of like where the Germans have to deal with, and the Japanese do. But this thing, nah, it doesn't need it. And as you can see, the 50 cals shred. They destroy other planes. It is absolutely amazing. So, this thing in arcade, it's a beast. It's kind of as simple as that. In Ground Strike, you can use it in so many different ways. Obviously, you can use it as a fighter if you want, fighter on fighter. You can get into the Death Ball if you feel like it, the big old mosh pit. Or you can use it to go after bombers. Obviously, with a rate of climb of around 18, that isn't wonderful. But with the upgrades, you can get up to 24.2 meters per second of rate of climb, which is definitely, it's definitely good. It's very, very good around this tier. And to be honest, most of the time with the bombers you come up against, they're either going to stay really high and try and get away from you, which you'll be able to catch, or they'll try and dive away from you. And guess what? The Mustang is wonderful in a dive. This thing can dive up to about 800 if you want it to. And that's in arcade. Obviously in realistic it's a bit different, but we'll get into that later. 800 is enough to catch absolutely anything, and because this plane is around the BR of the B-17s, and obviously everything else, like even the G5N1 or the G8N1, you see some of them around. Basically, you will have to deal with these big heavy bombers sometimes, and that's just how it's going to go. But the Mustang is equipped to do that very, very well. Even though a lot of people will say, oh, I'd rather have a 37mm or a 50mm gun pointed at the target instead of these 650 cals. Well, what I'd say is, the problem I'm having with using something as big as a 50mm gun is the fact that I get so many sparks, mainly because of my connection to the server. I'd rather have these 650s because they fire a lot faster. I know that if some of them don't get hits, then others will. And with the armor-piercing incendiary ammo, it absolutely tears through them. You always want to go for engines, obviously, with ammo like this. Wings, not so much. Wings aren't... The ammo here, the armor-piercing incendiary, even with the default ammo you get with the Mustang, I would always say it's a really, really good idea to go for the engines. Because if you hit the engines, the thing's dead. And if you don't kill it, it sets it on fire. It's as simple as that. So aiming for the fuselage and the engine and the tail is a great idea. There are a few, something like the second Mosquito you get with only the armor-piercing rounds. I would say go for the wings to try and chop them off. But with the Mustang, with its guns, it's definitely a good idea to go for basically the major parts of the aircraft, like the engine and the cockpit. So that was the first battle. As you can see, I did pretty well, even though some AI were put into that mix of kills and assists I got, but still I did alright. Here's the second battle. Now, I don't do as well in this, but the thing is, the way I play Domination is a lot different to how a lot of people play it. I am a defensive player in Domination. I've said this in a few other videos, a few of my older reviews, where basically I would rather be the person who defends our base than the person attacking the center or attacking their base, just because I feel like I can keep our base defended while the other guys, they go for the other bases. So they can basically rely that our base is not going to get attacked. And the Mustang fits this role great. It means that at the start of a battle you can get a really high altitude, which basically means you will have the speed advantage at anything trying to land at the base, and also it means if you see bombers going for targets, you can go after them. You can make their life a living hell because you have that dive speed. A lot of people say that a big problem, especially in realistic, with the B-17s, is that it's very hard to dive on them. It's very hard with a Spitfire when you don't have the speed in a dive to get after a B-17. It's very hard to kill them very efficiently without getting knocked out. Well, when you look at something like the Mustang, where basically 500 kilometers an hour or 600 kilometers an hour is kind of the norm in this thing in a dive, then you don't really have that problem. Basically, it's very easy to take out components and then zoom away. Basically do it how they used to do in the war. Basically hit and run tactics. And so it's very easy to do stuff like that. So bombers become kind of a problem of the past. And when you look at arcade, when you look at the fact that it's basically dominated by bombers in Ground Strike, that is a really, really nice thing to have. In level flight, it's very easy to get this thing up to 350, 400 kilometers an hour. So if you go head-to-head with something, and you take out some parts of them, you can easily get away by just going past them and just, going away. You don't feel that added pressure that you have to kill the target in your first pass. You can at least damage it and then get away without their gunners really being able to do something. It's kind of like when I talk to a lot of people who fly a lot of jets, they say that bombers aren't really a problem because you hit the bombers, and because you're going so fast, they can't basically turn their guns in time to shoot you. And that's basically exactly the same with the Mustang. Obviously, it's a lesser level, but basically, with the Mustang, you can easily do stuff like that, which is obviously a great asset to have in arcade. In domination, being a defensive flyer, that is down to myself. Obviously, being an offensive flyer in domination, you could easily do that in the Mustang, because as I said before, this thing can turn very well, it does loot very well, it basically does everything very well. It doesn't really have a weakness. Its weakness basically is if you decide to turn fight against a plane which is a very good turn fighter, or if you decide to energy fight against a plane which is a very good energy fighter. So basically, it's another one of those planes where you have to use your you have to use your opponent's weaknesses against them. Like something like a Ki-84. You know it climbs very well. You also know it turns very well. So what do? We don't engage him in a climb. We don't try and keep up with him. That was a very lucky shot, by the way, on that guy. And we don't engage him in a turn fight. So what do? We either head-to-head him, which isn't the best idea because he has cannons, or we just let him chase us, and we dive away from him into our allies, and watch our allies rip him apart while he's tunnel visioned on us. Yes, that does mean that you have to, count on your allies a little bit, but what you're going to do, you're going to have to do that every so often anyway. And as you can see, just getting a few hits on these bombers absolutely rips them apart. I kind of feel sorry for them. And especially, after flying Spitfires and Typhoons and stuff like that, being able to do this in a Tier 4 aircraft is absolutely wonderful. It feels great for the soul, being able to absolutely destroy the bombers who make your life sometimes an absolute living hell. And so, yeah, sometimes it's kind of a stress relief in this thing. Another great thing about the Mustang, when you think about it, if you do average in it or okay, you will make a lot of lions. And also because it's a higher tier aircraft, if you're going after jets or, researching jets, you can still make a decent amount of RP trying to get them. The main problem with the Mustang is that, the plane that comes after it, which you get the bonus from, is actually the F-82E, which is a terrible twin Mustang aircraft. So I definitely say nobody go for that. But also you can get the P-51D-5. Now the P-51D-5 is basically the same as the D5, it's slightly better, but it's the same kind of deal. It's still an amazing aircraft, but because they're lumped into, one area, it's basically a little tree by itself, it means that you don't have to unlock both. You can just go past it and get the F-82E and then go on to jets, which is absolutely wonderful. When you think about it. Another great thing about the Mustang, which is basically all across it, not just arcade, the sound of the engine. Sounds absolutely beautiful. When you're sat in that cockpit listening to that thing, it is absolutely lovely. And as you can see, here is a lesson in using your energy to a good advantage, basically changing your energy into altitude, which in arcade can mean that you basically survive a bit longer than you thought you would, because obviously altitude does help a lot in arcade, even though it is still down to energy and stuff. Being at altitude means that I can attack this guy from the top, means that I can attack his cockpit in a really, really easy way and just basically hit him. And if he wants to go head to head in a HS-129, feel like it. I can turn faster than you, I can turn at extreme speeds without losing too much energy, and I can absolutely rip you apart with my guns. These 50 cals, holy. By a few updates ago, when they basically improved the 50 cals, made them more realistic, they basically gave American fighters a new lease of life. Now, a big thing to talk about with the damage model, as I said, this thing, even if it takes some hits, is still pretty good. The problem is those hits have to be equaled out. a big thing that one of my subscribers talked about, and I'll talk about him more in realistic, is as long as your aircraft is balanced, this thing handles very well. A lot of aircraft don't. Like, the problem with the Mustang is, like, as you can see, one of my wings is red instead of both. If both of them were red, then it would handle basically like a normal Mustang. It's very, very weird. But once again, chewing up that guy, going up against an aircraft which, in my experience, can tank a lot of shots. That thing just went up in flames like a fireplace. It's absolutely wonderful. And once again, just do a 90-degree up, change it into altitude, and start again. And, I can't get past how nice this thing is to fly. Like, it's most of the time you won't get hit. The only time that I get hit in this game is basically first from my ally, which, sometimes it happens, and another time is when I'm not concentrating, which obviously is an absolute sin in this game. Obviously not concentrating means, well, it's a difference between life and death sometimes, but you can see the rate of fire of these machine guns going absolutely crazy on this target. The rate of fire on the machine guns is wonderful, and because you have a lot of ammunition, 1,880, I believe? I'll just check that for you. Yeah, 1,880, and because of my crew skill, that's reload of 20 seconds. So, these, they tear through, and your ammo seems to last a hell of a lot longer than I thought it would with the rate of fire, because basically, taking out targets, you don't really expend a lot of ammo, because if you think about it, the amount of damage your machine guns do, basically, you don't really have to fire a lot. I mean, there's even an argument to say that you could fire in bursts, kind of like what you do with cannons. But what's the point? I mean, you have 1,880 rounds, use them. Like, that's a great thing about American planes. Looking at the Corsair, the Thunderbolt, even the Mustang itself, you have so much ammo, missing a few shots ain't gonna make no difference. You should have enough in the tank to absolutely destroy your enemies. But as you can see, with this red wing, I'm kind of struggling to keep it level. I'm kind of struggling to, keep it going. And then I get shot by the Typhoon. And as you can see, that Typhoon with its 20mm, well, it does a lot of damage. But because he's equaled me out, I've actually got more maneuverability, which is kind of silly. But then again, the elevator isn't as good as I think it is, which happens quite a lot with me. It's not as good as the Russian elevators. But I still did decent that match. I actually did very well. Even though I sacrificed my B-17 and my Corsair trying to get the objective right at the end to try and win that battle. But with the Mustang, defensively flying in arcade, you do very well. Like, it's just as simple as that, really. It has everything you need to be a good arcade plane. It can energy fight, it can turn, it has the firepower. There's nothing bad about it in arcade, which makes it a powerhouse at Tier 4. And the fact it can't face jets, wunderbar. That's basically it. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful in arcade. But anyway, let's get on to some performance testing. So let's get into some performance testing, where basically I'll be seeing how far I can wet this thing until it overheats. But there's a problem with the P-51D-5 Mustang. I can't get the engine to overheat, no matter what I do. I've never had it overheat, even without any modifications or anything like that. This thing does not overheat. So basically, I'm going to see how long it takes me to get to 10,000 meters, which is pretty high, to be honest. The maximum altitude of this thing is actually 12,700 meters, so it's actually quite close to its cap. Also, looking at it, I'm using its full tank, which is an hour and 48 minutes of fuel, but you also have a choice of 45 minutes to an hour. So you have three options. You might as well always go for the 45 minutes, because to be honest, in a realistic battle, you do have a lot of ammo with the 1,880 shots, but the thing is, you are going to go back to base at some point. Maybe you get hit, maybe you run out of ammo, you know how it is. So basically, 45 minutes is definitely enough, and also taking more than that, you definitely do disadvantage yourself against fighters which have a superior climb rate. This thing has a rate of climb with most of its modifications. The only modifications I don't have on this thing while I'm testing it is the G-suit and the cover. And the cover on this aircraft gives very, very minor additional add-ons to it, like plus 0.5 meters per second to climb rate. So obviously this thing will be a little bit different with that, but not a huge issue. It's not massive. So with the rate of climb being 17.6 meters per second compared to other aircraft, obviously it's not the best, but it's definitely not the worst at this BR. And also, with that 17.6, that's not really including war emergency power, which with this thing you can WEP as much as you want. So you're basically always going to be doing that in realistic battles. You might as well. Secondary weapons wise, you have either two types of rockets or bombs. The rockets are 6 127mm or 6 140mm rockets. Basically, I've never used these. I do not see the point. They hamper your aircraft too much. So, like, it's up to you, I suppose, if you want to do some ground attack or have a bit of an advantage in head-to-heads. But for me, they're useless. You also can equip this thing with 2,000-pound bombs. The only way I could see myself doing that is if there is one enemy aircraft on the other team. I go back to refuel, I put them on just to hit some ground targets to make sure we hit make sure we win by tickets if we can't chase the guy down. Offensive wise, looking at the guns, you have quite a lot of choices between ammo. You obviously start off with the default, which is actually very good. You have a lot of armor-piercing bullets and also some API shells, some armor-piercing incendiary bullets, and also just some incendiary bullets by themselves, so that's actually really good. Then with the universal or omnipurpose, obviously you have some API and API-T, which is always good, and incendiary as well. Ground targets-wise, basically the same. These guys basically all have the same types of shells, just in a different numeracy. So basically you have 3 of one to 2 of the other kind of thing. With me, I like the tracers, the API-T, the M20 armor-piercing incendiary tracer bullets. I feel like that is better than the rest, basically because your shots are always being traced, so you know exactly where they're going, and also the rate of fire seems to be a bit better. I may be wrong in that, but also armor piercing and incendiary is exactly what you're looking for. Like, there is no reason to not use these belts. They're basically the best belts for this thing. Upgrades wise, when you're looking on the modifications, the ones that you're really going to look for are the engine and the engine injection. I really struggled with this thing when I first got it. Unlocking modifications is quite tough in this thing when you actually look at it. Like the second round of modifications are 5,000 each, third round 4,200, fourth round 5,400. So it takes a lot of RP to unlock modifications, and when you don't have any and you're flying the stock plane, the fact that you can face stuff which is fully upgraded is kind of nonsense. So in this plane, I may actually advocate in realistic going after AI, at least for the first few flyouts, because you need those upgrades. And to be honest, if you're not willing to put Golden Eagles in the game, which I'm not willing to do, there's no, like, your performance is so bad without the modifications. But once you get that engine, once you get that engine injection, your plane becomes twice, maybe 3 times as good as it was before. So they're the stuff you're going to go for. Obviously, as I said before in the arcade part, the engine is a problem. It sets on fire quite a lot. It can only take a few shots, stuff like that. So stuff like a cover and obviously the engine upgrade help with that a little bit. They reduce fires, in my opinion, even though it says it doesn't really do that. It does. The cover does obviously increase overall durability and such like that. So it kind of does, which is nice. Looking at climb rates, I usually try and stick around 15 degrees. 0 to 2000 is about 17 degrees, 2000 to 4000, 15, and then it just gets decreased and decreased. Usually, though, instead of looking at degrees, I like climbing at around 250, 260 in this thing. But when you're in the combat area, and when you know planes are around, you have to get this thing at around about maybe 320, 350 in a straight line. Now, the reason for that is, if you get caught under maybe 300 kilometers an hour IAS, this thing does not handle very well. It's one of those fighters which, at low speeds, handles like ass. So, what you have to do, basically, is to make sure that you never get into that position. So, what do? You just point the nose down. You'll still climb a little bit, but at least you'll get that extra energy from the speed, which can help out a hell of a lot. Now, when we get into the dive bit of this, there is something to take into account. You've got to remember I'm using a full tank of fuel here, which basically means the plane is heavier, it's going to dive faster, but it's also going to brake faster. And there have been times in this plane, using 45 minutes of fuel, where basically I've been able to dive at about 800 and then pull the nose up and not break my wings. That is not the fact in this part, because, as I said, using full tank of fuel, it does really harbour the performance. But as you can see, the engine, it's 97 degrees Celsius water, 61 degrees Celsius oil, and I'm up 6,000 meters. Like, this thing is not going to overheat anytime soon. It's absolutely crazy that it can do this. I mean, I don't know if this was how it was in real life, but what I've read about a WEP in most planes, you basically overclock your engine, right? And you could last maybe 5 minutes on WEP, or maybe 10. Not many planes could do more than that, so I don't know if the Mustang was able to do this for this long, but hey-ho, I need to do some more research. Also, another point is there's not going to be a historical fact-finding part of this review for the Mustang, because I watched this podcast from Bowtime, and basically they covered everything I was going to cover in this review. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link in the description for you guys to find it, because it's a brilliant podcast telling you everything you'd ever need to know about any Mustang. So yeah, you might as well go for that. And basically, as we climb here, you can see as we increase in altitude, I have to drop the nose more and more and more, because obviously it's harder climbing at higher altitudes. I think this aircraft performs best between 4,000 and 2,000 meters, but it can also easily get up to 7,000. So if you come up against fighters which are, good low or mid altitude fighters, kind of like the Russians, just keep climbing. And if they don't follow you, then you survive, you can dive on them, and there you go. Like, there's not much else to do. But if they do follow you, then you will do better at high altitude than them. As I said before in the arcade part, I'm going to get into this here. When you look at other nations, you can actually pinpoint where the Mustang is better than them. Like, most of the Russian planes are very good low-altitude fighters, like 0 to 2,000, maybe 0 to 3,000 meters. Now, even though the Mustang isn't the best around there, you can still turn fight very efficiently in realistic against them if you have to. And also converting speed into altitude is magnificent in this plane. It is absolutely wonderful. It is brilliant at it. Like, it defies belief when I started properly booming and zooming in this thing when getting most of the modifications, because there is no plane that can equal it, that I have found so far. Obviously, I need to fly the Bearcat a bit more, and stuff like that, to see if there is a competitor. But the fact that you can get into a combat area, dive about 1,000 meters, and then you're going from 300 kilometers an hour to 600, it's wonderful. Its baseline speed is probably late 500s from my experience. It's definitely not above 600, it's probably around 580, something like that, which is absolutely wonderful. Let's just check. what Gaijin's little billboard says. Its max speed is 698. I don't know where they get that figure from, but according to them, that's it. I would say knock off about 100 kilometers an hour, and in a straight line, that is its max speed. At base level, running away with a web. So basically, whatever you come up against, you can get away from. It's absolutely wonderful. Or you can keep at the same level as them, and because their engines will overheat and yours won't, there you go, you have the advantage. Another thing to take into account is a turn time of 24.7 seconds. That is absolute horse crap. I do not believe that at all, but the thing is, I do use this plane and engage at very, very, very high speeds. So yeah, the turn time is obviously going to be decreased when you're going at high speeds. That's basically just how it works. But another thing to take into account is rolling and turning harshly at high speeds. I would say if you're going after a target and you're going faster than maybe 550, do not do a sharp turn. Just ease it around, and then anything higher than that, you just have to ease it. Maybe knock off the engine and just ease the plane back to around that 500, 550, and then turn, because you will still have a brilliant turn. But the problem is with it, is that you will snap your wings if you turn too harshly. So it's a problem. At low speeds, you do the kangaroo with the elevator while you're turning. At high speeds, you can't, you just can't. You just snap your wings off. But, it's not too bad. As long as you get used to it. It's very much like any other plane. As long as you get used to it, it's completely fine. Just getting used to it is a bit of an issue. This Mustang definitely is a separate beast to anything else I've flown before. It's very good at basically everything, as long as you know how to use it. But I'll get into more of that in the realistic part. Looking at the interior, the cockpit is beautiful. It's a lovely cockpit, and also it shows how American designs, they kind of got with it, kind of thing. A lot of the older American designs, like 1941, 1942, if you look behind you, it's very hard to see behind you, but in the Mustang, they made it the bubble canopy, so basically you could see behind you if somebody was on your ass. So that's quite a nice little improvement. It's nice that they have all the pressure gauges, just in case you are going very high speed, so you know exactly how much this thing can take. If you learn all of the pressures that it can take, such as the manifold pressure, the interior pressure, stuff like that, then you know how far to push it. Another thing to take into account is I am using automatic engine controls with this, because I know most players do. But usually I will use manual engine controls, and I will flip up the radiator to 100%, because it basically just makes this thing climb a hell of a lot faster. So that's another thing to take into account. Just going around with the engine controls is always a good idea. Not if you're new to the game, obviously, but if you know how a plane works, then obviously it's a great idea. But as you can see, we're up to 9,500, and this thing is starting to struggle. It struggles around the 8,000 meter mark, I'd say, with climbing. Just to keep it up to 240 kilometers an hour, I'm having to go into a really shallow climb. But still, it's able to do it. I haven't actually used that much fuel or that much time, which is quite surprising. Even on 45 minutes of fuel, I wouldn't have lost that much, which is kind of weird. You're looking at about 30 minutes. So yeah, interesting. The oil has actually decreased in temperature, which is wonderful. The water has slightly gone up, but it's just going to stay there. It's not going to go up anymore. It's kind of crazy how that has happened. I need to learn more about the Mustang engine, because that to me is absolutely insane. Like that just shouldn't happen. But I suppose at higher altitudes it kind of makes sense. Another thing with the 650 cals, they do fire very, very rapidly, so cannons you don't really need. Another thing to take into account is that its max speed is 698 at 7,700 meters, showing that this thing is a high altitude fighter. I would love to try and get this thing up to 698 at 7,700, because I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be able to. But then again, I haven't tested it. We shall see in the future if I decide to throw in tests like that into the game. Rockets-wise, I did talk about them a bit before, but with the rockets, I did try them a few times. It's kind of like the rockets with the Beaufighter Mark 21, I believe, or the Beaufighter before that. They don't fire straight. They don't go straight at a target. They sometimes go left, sometimes go right, down and up, and it's really just infuriating. So I don't really recommend them. With the bombs, you obviously don't get a targeting reticle, but if you're in a fighter like this, you don't really need one. Like, it's very easy to dive bomb and stuff like this, and if you're an experienced dive bomber, such as a Ju-87 pilot or an IL-2 pilot, or even just a normal strategic bomber, it's very easy to tell where that target reticle is going to be around anyway. And a 1,000-pound bomb, even though all the bombs got nerfed with the splash damage, 1,000-pound bomb's going to still do a lot of damage to a small area, so targeting isn't that much of an issue. Obviously, looking at ground forces, taking this thing out in realistic battle, that would be fun. Like, use the rockets and the bombs to try and kill human tanks. That would be quite interesting. I want to try that, actually. Otherwise, yeah, there's not much else to say about this beautiful aircraft. It does have combat flaps, actually. Combat flaps are very useful in turns. That will decrease your turn time, which is wonderful. Obviously, don't use them exceeding maybe about 500. I have used them at 450 before, and they haven't ripped off, so that's a thing. Make sure you don't do that. But we are coming up to 10,000 meters, and it took us 18 minutes and 4 seconds, which is quite a long time. That's probably longer than your average realistic battle, but still, it shows that you can do it. And I go into a shallow dive instead of a straight down, just to show how you would use this thing realistically. And once again, just remember, I do have a full tank of fuel, so most of the time you won't be in this position where your plane is this heavy. And I am also going at 100%, so I'm not even going to 0%, which usually in a dive like this I would go to. It does start telling me to reduce speed, and the wings break off at 604 kilometers an hour. Sorry I didn't test the flaps, I just completely forgot about them, but I'm sure it's around maybe 450 with a full tank. And then, as an added bonus, the tail breaks off at 1,104 kilometers an hour. An interesting thing is it also says exceeded Mach number, so I've never seen that before in any plane, but it's quite interesting. Yeah, so that's a nice little tidbit, and hopefully there's more of them with this plane. It is definitely different to whatever else I've flown. But anyway, let's get on to some realistic battles. So here we are in realistic battles, where I have one here for you today, and I'm squadded up with Monosat and Isaac Clark 345. Two of my subscribers, Isaac Clark 345. All I can say is thank you. This guy is a beast with a Mustang. He knows exactly how to fly it, he knows exactly what to do with it, and he basically taught me everything I know about this thing. He taught me how to basically handle it when it basically has no upgrades, and he also showed me how to properly use it in a combat situation. He also has a Steam page where basically it's a guide to flying the Mustang. So what I'll do is, once again, I will link that in the comments section. Sorry, not comments. The description section, because it is absolutely wonderful. It is a guide which will get you through how to use the Mustang properly. And one of his big things is saying this is not a Thunderbolt. A lot of people try and fly this thing like a Thunderbolt, and it isn't. I can't agree with that more. The Thunderbolt is very, very good at energy fighting, but to be honest, in turn fights and such, it is pretty terrible. The Mustang outclasses it entirely in turn fights. It is a plane which you don't really need altitude on your side. You just need speed. Speed is key. And that means because speed is key, your energy is key. Most planes, if not all planes you come up against in this thing, you are able to beat in a straight line, speed-wise, especially if you have all the upgrades. Especially with WEP, and especially with all the crazy stuff you can do with this engine. And that means that if you're in a fight that you can't get out of, and you are obviously at a disadvantage, you can run away. But the thing is, it's always unrealistic. It is deciding what you're coming up against and how can you beat them. In this game, we're flying against Germany. So what are we going to be coming up against? The higher tier BF-109s, maybe a TA-152, definitely some Focke-Wulf Ds. Simple as that. What advantage do we have over them? Turning. We can turn better than them, and it's a weird thing to say in what a lot of people think is just an energy fighter, but the Mustang, in realistic, at, mid to high speeds, is a wonderful turning aircraft. And as you can see, we're just having a conversation in chat. But the whole idea is right now, we're getting to a position where using our climb rate, we will be at a less of a disadvantage against the enemies. Obviously, BF-109s can climb faster than this thing. But the thing is, if you give them less of an energy advantage, that's always better. It's as simple as that. And you can always dive away from them. I don't think any BF-109 or Focke-Wulf will be able to catch this thing in a dive. This thing can go up to 800 kilometers an hour and not break its wings when it feels like it. And as long as you keep, just moving your mouse just a little bit up, then you should be fine. Also, this thing, just to take into account something else, when you are diving onto a target, which hopefully you will be doing quite a lot of the times, it does start to shake around 600, 650, which can be very annoying, but that's just something to take into account. But as you will see in this battle, Mustangs can completely change a game. They are one of those aircraft which are game changers in realistic. When you have a squad of 3 of them, you can do anything. And then when I think about if I had a squad of Corsairs or if I had a squad of Spitfires, I wouldn't feel and have the same confidence. But in a Mustang, I feel like I can do anything just because of how it flies. Even at low speeds, against the Japanese or against the British, you can still get away. You can still turn fight them, which is an amazing thing to do when you feel like this aircraft really shouldn't be able to do it. Also, this video is also to show how bad I am at shooting with this thing. Obviously, you are going at high speeds. I do have to learn basically a better way of doing it at higher speeds. Another thing to take into account was another topic we were discussing was gun convergence. Now, usually I set my gun convergence in this thing at 800, which is kind of insane, or 600. Basically, this is because there are a lot of instances where it's actually a really good idea of going head-to-head in a Mustang. You start shooting at the enemy at about 1.3k, stop shooting at about 1k, and then dive away so they can't hit you. So, setting my gun convergence that far away, I think is a really good idea. Obviously, if you're not comfortable with that and you prefer to hit all of your shots, then obviously a gun convergence of 400 is always a good idea. But there are situations where head-to-heads are really, really good ideas in the Mustang, and I know a lot of players do not like head-to-heads. They think it's a cheap tactic, or they think it, players shouldn't do it. But it is a valid tactic. When you have like a Yak 9T with a 37mm on the front, that is what they used to do in the war. The LA-5, it was basically designed for head-to-heads against BF-109s. There was a reason why the Yak 9T was so good, and also the Yak 7 and the Yak 1B, because the Germans would see, oh, it's a Yak, but they don't know what type of Yak it is, so they wouldn't go head-to-head with it, therefore giving the Yak 7 and the Yak 1B an advantage. That's just how it worked. It was a proven tactic in World War II. But in the Mustang, it is definitely not the only tactic. Now, a lot of planes, they are very good, or they have strengths in some areas and are weak in others. The only weakness I believe the Mustang has in realistic is the fact that if you get caught at low speed, But you should never get caught at low speed. If you know how to approach the combat area, know what speed you should be going, around 320, 350, something like that, maybe 300, then you should never get caught at low energy. Therefore, turning shouldn't be a problem. And even if you are struggling to turn at those speeds, combat flaps enabled, let's get on it, son. Stuff like that, you know. So, that's basically its only weakness. And that is all dependent on you. Isn't it nice when you go into a battle and you know the only weakness this plane has is always dependent on you? It's not like you're going to come up against a superior aircraft or anything like that who is better in any way. I would say the Mustang, the stuff that it comes up against, is superior in every way, giving it, you know, a basic advantage over everything. Now, you could say that's a problem with BR and matchmaking, but if you up-tiered it, or up-BR'd it, then, well, it's dead in the water against jets. So, yeah, this is basically a Tier 4 aircraft, which is probably the optimum plane to fly at its BR. And, as you can see, most of our team has been wrecked or has been struggling, but we three are still alive. There is a problem with the Mustang, I'd say. If you're flying it by yourself, there can be a lot of instances where your team gets destroyed. I mean, obviously American pilots do get a very bad reputation in War Thunder, and sometimes it is true, where basically you are always the last guy on your team, unfortunately, in the Mustang. The Mustang is all about picking your opportunities, and that could mean just flying around for 20 minutes and waiting for that opportunity. And if that opportunity does not show itself to you, then you cannot take it, can you? So your whole team can be dead before you do anything. Now, a lot of people may say, I want to help out my team. Well, okay, fly a Bearcat. That's all I can say to you. The Mustang is not designed for that. The Mustang is a one-on-one fighter. It is there to basically take out a target when you're in an advantageous position. And as you can see, I can use my superior speed with a bit of wobble to turn on this guy. Yeah, the wobble is a bit of a problem, but the thing is that's because I'm hard turning. And you don't have to hard turn, that's just, it makes it easier on me to do it. But in a flatline speed, this guy is probably the fastest guy on his team, and I can easily catch up with him. How sad is that? Like, this guy cannot do anything. I can outturn him, I can outrun him, I can do everything in my power to kill him, and it will kill him. It's as simple as that. There is nothing he can do. And while this is always going on, Isaac is turn fighting Germans and not getting shot and killing them. Now, isn't that just a show of how brilliant the Mustang is? You've got one Mustang flying and attacking a BF-109 which cannot get away, with support from my other squad member, Monosat, and Isaac is turn fighting 3 Germans and winning. So that just shows this thing can be a turn fighter, it can be a climber, it can be an energy fighter, it can be whatever the hell damn you want it to be. And it will do well in all those roles. It is insane, this plane. It is not bad at anything. Now, obviously... Oh, God, what have I done? Now, obviously, there will be times where you do come up against aircraft which will be able to outturn you. Okay, that's fine. You will be able to get more energy than them. Simple as that. Or you will be able to outclimb them. This thing in a zoom climb is insane. 600 kilometers an hour, you can go from 1,000 meters to 4,000 meters in the brink of a few seconds. And here is me showing how I can't shoot for Jack. But then my squad mate comes in and finishes off the job, which is wonderful. There are times where an enemy will turn against you or away from you, and basically you have to zoom out because you can't turn at that speed, but that's completely fine. Like, that's okay. That's a completely fine thing to happen because you can still get on his ass. This guy is in a G2. He cannot do anything. He can roll as much as he wants, he can do all this crazy maneuvers, but basically all he's trying to do is stay alive. This thing does lock up a bit, I suppose, at higher speeds, but what plane doesn't? And because this thing's higher speed is higher than anything else, oh well, it doesn't even matter. But, once again, you can see my abhorrent shooting trying to hit this guy. There have been matches where I've done really well, but this one, I think, even though I didn't do the best, it shows how this thing can be used in so many different ways, just because of how my squad is flying. Now, my squad mate did get that kill, which is wonderful. I did absolutely terrible there. I should have killed that guy, and I nearly rammed the BF, which shows I wasn't on the top of my game. But yeah, us three as a squad changed this battle. We were losing it, and because Isaac was able to engage those 3 Germans with a bit of help from the Allies, because we were able to finish off that BF-109 who was in a position to dive on our guys, we were easily able to just dominate this match. And that's all I can say about the Mustang. The Mustang dominates. It dominates at its BR in realistic, just as it does in arcade. And with the additional bonus of, if it doesn't dominate, you can just run. Like, it's not very patriotic, but that's just something you can do. It's something, it gives you that extra option. And as you can see, I'm able to, in a straight line, just pick up a ton of speed again, which means I could convert it into altitude, I could keep going the speed. You know, there's endless possibilities with this thing. The only problem that could happen is if somebody comes down and sets my engine on fire. The problem against Germans is you start coming up against those 30mm, and one of those can just puncture your engine. And you got to worry about that. But once again, if you're going at a high speed, if you're going fast, like you should be doing when you're in the combat area, then you don't have to worry about stuff like that, because it's very, very, very hard to shoot you. And because all these Germans, basically, they dived before we got there. So they were basically done for from the beginning. Try and get some shots there, unfortunately miss, and fortunately miss my ally as well there. That could have been a bit of a problem. But yeah, even though I didn't do well in this match, it just shows how dominant the Mustang can be. There was no place in this match where anybody could have shot me, or anybody could have got after me. Nobody was at my altitude. They weren't able to climb the way I could. They weren't able to have the same speed as I had. Anything like that. There was nothing they could do. And if you fly this Mustang right, with all of its, full modifications, that's just what happens. You can't do anything against this thing. It's kind of like the whole David versus Goliath. When you're in a German plane, you shoot down a Mustang, you feel so good. But 99 out of 100 times the Mustang's going to win, as long as you fly it right. And I hope this video showed how to fly right, but as I said, if it didn't, go to that Steam page, go and look up what Isaac Clarke 345 has put, because it is wonderful. It is a great, great show of what the Mustang can do and how to fly it. So make sure to check that out. Because, well, why not? You got a spare 5 minutes, just read it. It's as simple as that. And if you want to become a competent pilot in the Mustang, go and do it. But anyway, let's get on to the final verdict. And so here we find ourselves in the final verdict, where I'll be discussing the strengths and weaknesses I believe the P-51D-5 has. So let's get on to the strengths. You have an advantage against any plane that you will face in the Mustang. This is a wonderful feeling. The fact that whatever you come up against, you can make a strategy where you can beat them instead of being helpless against them. Your rapid-fire 50 cals will tear through anything that comes in your way. As you saw in these videos, I completely decimated a lot of stuff which was just in front of me, turning wings off, setting stuff on fire, just destroying whatever came near me. Having 45 minutes of fuel means that you can outlast many fighters in the air, and you still perform as well or if not better than them. So basically that means when you come up against Spitfires with 20 minutes of fuel and BF-109s with 20 minutes, they will have to land before you do, so you can catch them there if you're not confident about fighting them in the air. You can get away from any plane you come up against, meaning that you are never helpless. Diving away at 650 kilometers an hour and slowly getting that down to 590 while going away from any plane you come up against is wonderful. Works every time if you're not in a position that you can take out your enemy. You can wet the engine all day long and it will never overheat. This is a wonderful thing and can give you an advantage over those other planes such as the Spitfire, the Ki-84s, the late BF-109s, stuff like that. So that's always a nice thing to have. So let's get on to the weaknesses. If you are caught at low speeds and low energy, you are going to struggle. This thing does not handle well at low speeds, and if somebody is up against you, and you are, well, you've got into a state where you have low energy, you're pretty much dead. Unless you're able to dive away, which is not always possible. Sometimes being a predator like a Mustang can become a disadvantage since you cannot always help your team when they need it. When I was talking in realistic battles about you pick your battles, you basically fly over the enemy and you pick what you want, like basically how a cheetah does to a gazelle. But the problem with that is, if your team is in dire straits and they need you in there, sometimes you're not able to help them, you're not in a position to help them. Because you will be engaging at high speeds, accuracy may become a problem. I struggle at high speeds with accuracy. This may just be a fault of my own, but, well, this is a review based on my opinions as well as facts, so there we go. Without this thing being fully modified, or at least having most of its modifications, it does not fly well. You really need to concentrate on getting the engine and engine injection upgrades, because without them, this plane, it is not great. It's basically, once you start getting those higher tier modifications, this thing becomes a beast. But until then, you are going to struggle a little bit. But anyway, looking at this beautiful beast, it's obviously a very iconic plane in history in World War II. It is a wonderful plane in game, and there is no reason not to fly this thing. It is amazing in every way. So, thank you for watching, and have a great day.